The morning Penelope Zarelli discovered her father's body in the barn. She knew the wolves would come circling before he was even cold in the ground. She had found him slumped against the hay bales, his face peaceful despite the heart that had finally given out after 63 hard years of ranching in the unforgiving Colorado territory. It was April 1878, and the spring thaw had turned the roads around Cripple Creek into rivers of mud that made everything harder, including grief. Penelope was 22 years old, unmarried, and now the sole owner of 300 acres of grazing land that men had been eyeing since before her mother died 5 years prior. Her father had protected her, had kept the vultures at bay with his reputation and his Winchester rifle. Now she stood alone. The funeral was held 2 days later under a sky so blue it seemed cruel. The preacher spoke words that Penelope barely heard, her attention divided between the open grave and the faces of the men who had come to pay their respects. Some were genuine friends who had worked alongside her father for decades. Others were predators dressed in their Sunday best, already calculating their moves. Malcolm Pritchard stood closest to the grave aside from Penelope herself. He owned the largest ranch in the county, a sprawling operation that had swallowed up 3 smaller homesteads in the past decade. He was 45, silver-haired, and had the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no. He caught Penelope's eye and nodded solemnly, his expression carefully arranged into something approximating sympathy. After the burial, neighbors brought food to the house as was customary. Penelope's small kitchen overflowed with casseroles and pies, more food than she could eat in a month. Women she barely knew squeezed her hands and told her everything would be all right, that the Lord would provide. The men were less subtle. 3 of them approached her that very day with offers to buy the ranch, their voices low and urgent, as if they were doing her a favor by circling before her father's body was even settled in the earth. She turned them all away. Malcolm Pritchard waited until the others had left. The sun was setting, painting the mountains to the west in shades of orange and purple. Penelope was washing dishes when she heard his knock, firm and authoritative. "Miss Zarelli," he said when she opened the door. "Might I have a word?" She wanted to refuse, but propriety and exhaustion won out. She led him into the parlor, not offering him a seat. He took one anyway, settling into her father's favorite chair as if he belonged there. "I know this is a difficult time," Malcolm began, his voice smooth as creek stones. "Your father was a good man, salt of the earth." "Thank you," Penelope said, remaining standing. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", with dark hair she wore in a practical bun and eyes the color of strong coffee. She had her mother's Italian features and her father's stubborn jaw. "I want to help you," Malcolm continued. "A woman alone cannot run a ranch of this size. The work is too demanding, too dangerous. You need a man's protection, a man's strength." "I have ranch hands," Penelope said quietly. "2 old men and a boy," Malcolm countered. "Not enough to bring in the hay, manage the cattle, handle the 1,000 things that need doing." "Be reasonable, Penelope. May I call you Penelope? Miss Zarelli is fine." Something flickered in his eyes, irritation quickly masked. "Miss Zarelli, I am prepared to make you a very generous offer. I will buy your ranch for fair market value and more. I will marry you. You will want for nothing. You will have my name, my protection, my resources." The presumption of it stole her breath. "Mr. Pritchard, I have no intention of selling my ranch or marrying anyone." "You say that now," he said, standing. He was not a tall man, barely taller than Penelope herself, but he carried himself as if he towered over everyone. "But winter will come again. Cattle will need tending. Fences will need mending. You will change your mind. When you do, my offer stands." He left, and Penelope locked the door behind him, her hands shaking with anger more than fear. She had grown up on this ranch, had ridden the fences with her father since she was old enough to sit a horse. She knew every creek, every pasture, every stand of cottonwoods. This land was in her blood. She would not surrender it to Malcolm Pritchard or anyone else. The weeks that followed proved harder than she had anticipated. Her father's two longtime ranch hands, Pete and Samuel, were loyal but aging. Pete was 68 with arthritis in his knees, and Samuel was 72 and half deaf. Young Tommy Brennan, barely 16, had more enthusiasm than skill. Together they managed the essential work, but barely. Fences sagged. The vegetable garden went to weeds. The roof over the barn developed a leak that Penelope patched herself, climbing up with tar and shingles while Pete shouted anxious instructions from below. Malcolm Pritchard rode out twice more, each time with new arguments for why she should accept his proposal. He brought flowers once, an awkward bouquet of wildflowers that he handed to her as if presenting evidence in a trial. Penelope put them in water out of sheer ingrained politeness, then regretted it when he took it as encouragement. "You are being stubborn," he told her on his third visit, his patience wearing thin. "The whole county is talking about how you refuse to see sense. People are concerned for you." "Then people should mind their own business," Penelope replied. They were standing in the yard between the house and the barn. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, and she was acutely aware that she was dressed in her work clothes, covered in dust and sweat, while Malcolm looked crisp and clean in his expensive suit. "I am trying to help you," he said, his voice dropping to something that might have been meant as seductive but came across as vaguely threatening. "Why must you make this so difficult?" "Because I do not wish to marry you, Mr. Pritchard. I do not wish to sell my ranch." "How many times must I say it?" His jaw tightened. "We will speak again when you are more reasonable." He rode away, and Penelope felt the first real prickle of unease. There had been something in his eyes, something cold and determined. Malcolm Pritchard was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. She suspected he would not take no for an answer much longer. Her suspicion proved correct, though the form his persistence took surprised her. It was mid-June when the stranger rode up to the ranch. Penelope was in the barn, trying to coax the old milk cow into cooperation, when she heard the hoofbeats. She emerged into the bright sunlight, shading her eyes, to see a man dismounting near the house. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a full beard and hair that hung past his collar. He wore buckskin and looked as if he had just come down from the high mountains. Something about him made her breath catch in her throat, though she could not say why. "Can I help you?" she called, wiping her hands on her apron. The man turned, and Penelope felt the full force of his gaze. His eyes were a startling gray blue, like ice on a shadowed creek. His face was weathered but not old, mid-30s perhaps, with strong features and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Are you Miss Penelope Zarelli?" His voice was deep, rough-edged, as if he did not use it often. "I am." "Name is Isaac Quade. I heard you might need help on your ranch." Penelope's first instinct was relief. Her second was suspicion. "Who told you that? Man in town. Said you were looking for hands after your father passed. My condolences." She studied him carefully. He did not look like the usual drifters who came looking for work. There was something solid about him, something steady. But there was also something wild, untamed. He looked like a man more comfortable with mountains and silence than with people. "I cannot pay much," she said honestly. "Room and board and what little I can manage in wages. That will do. You understand ranch work." "I understand hard work. I have run trap lines in the high country for the past 10 years. Before that, I worked ranches in Wyoming and Montana. 10 years in the mountains." That explained the look of him, the way he seemed uncomfortable with even this much conversation. Mountain men were a breed apart, solitary and self-sufficient. "Why come down now?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression, a shadow of old pain. "Time for a change." She should have asked more questions. She should have demanded references, should have been more careful. But she was desperate, and there was something about Isaac Quade that made her feel inexplicably safe. "All right," she said. "You can start today. The bunkhouse is clean. Pete and Samuel are out checking the north fence line and Tommy is helping them. I will introduce you when they return." Isaac nodded once, a sharp dip of his chin. "I will see to my horse first." He led his animal, a sturdy bay gelding, toward the barn. Penelope watched him go, wondering what she had just agreed to. But the work needed doing, and he looked like a man who could do it. Isaac Quade proved to be exactly what the ranch needed. He worked from dawn until after dark without complaint, tackling jobs that had been neglected for months. He repaired fences with swift efficiency, rehung the barn door that had been dragging, and climbed onto the roof to properly fix the leak Penelope had only temporarily patched. He was strong, stronger than any man Penelope had ever seen, with arms like tree trunks and shoulders that seemed capable of bearing any burden. He was also quiet. He spoke when necessary, and not a word more. At meals, which they took together in the ranch house as was customary, he ate steadily and listened to the chatter of the other hands without contributing. Penelope found herself watching him, curious about this silent mountain man who had appeared so providentially when she needed help most. "Where did you trap?" she asked one evening, unable to bear the silence any longer. Isaac looked up from his plate, those ice-blue eyes meeting hers. "High country, above timberline mostly, beaver, fox, some bear. That is lonely work. I preferred the solitude." "Why?" For a long moment she thought he would not answer. Then he said, "People are complicated, mountains are simple." It was the most personal thing he had said since arriving. Penelope wanted to ask more, wanted to know what had driven him to a decade of isolation, but something in his expression stopped her. Whatever his reasons, they were his own. 2 weeks after Isaac arrived, Malcolm Pritchard rode up again. Penelope was in the kitchen, preserving early strawberries, when she heard the commotion in the yard. She wiped her hands and went to the window, her stomach sinking when she saw Malcolm's distinctive black stallion. But this time, Malcolm was not alone. He had brought 3 men with him, all mounted. Penelope recognized one as his foreman, a cruel-faced man named Sykes. The others were strangers. She went outside, drying her hands on her apron. "Mr. Pritchard, I was not expecting you. Miss Zarelli." His voice was different today, harder. "I have come on official business." "What business?" He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a folded document. "This is a contract signed by your father 3 months before his death. In it, he agrees to sell this ranch to me for the sum of $3,000. The sale was to be finalized upon his death or 1 year from signing, whichever came first." The world seemed to tilt. "That is impossible. My father would never—" "It is his signature," Malcolm interrupted. "Witnessed and notarized. I have been patient, Miss Zarelli, but my patience has limits. This ranch is mine by legal right." Penelope's mind raced. $3,000 was far below market value for the ranch, but more importantly, her father would never have agreed to such a thing. He had promised her the ranch would be hers. He had told her so 100 times. "Let me see that," she demanded. Malcolm handed over the document with a thin smile. Penelope unfolded it, her heart pounding. It was dated March 15, 1878, just 3 weeks before her father's death. The signature at the bottom looked like her father's handwriting, the familiar scrawl she had seen on 1,000 letters and ledgers. But something was wrong. She could feel it. "This is a forgery," she said, her voice shaking. "It is properly notarized," Malcolm said. "The notary will testify to its authenticity." "Then the notary is lying." Malcolm's expression hardened. "You are distraught, which is understandable, but the law is the law. I will give you 1 week to vacate the premises. After that, I will have the sheriff remove you by force if necessary." "You cannot do this. I already have." He took the document back, refolded it, and returned it to his saddlebag. "1 week, Miss Zarelli. Be reasonable." He turned his horse to leave, but before he could, a voice cut across the yard. "That paper is a lie." Everyone turned. Isaac Quade stood near the barn, a hammer in one hand. He had been replacing boards on the corral fence. Now he walked toward them with the slow, deliberate stride of a man who had faced down grizzly bears and was not impressed by 4 men on horses. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" "Isaac Quade. I work here." "This does not concern you." "It does if you are trying to steal this woman's ranch through fraud." Malcolm's foreman, Sykes, moved his horse forward. "You are speaking out of turn, mountain man. Best shut your mouth before we shut it for you." Isaac did not even glance at him. His eyes stayed locked on Malcolm. "I was in town the day that paper was supposedly signed. March 15. I remember because it was the day I came down from the high country after the spring thaw. I saw Samuel Zarelli at the general store. He was buying supplies. We spoke briefly. Penelope's breath caught. Samuel Zarelli had been her father's name. "So," Malcolm said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "So he was in town all day. I saw him at the store around 10 in the morning and again at the saloon around 5 in the afternoon. He was buying drinks for a friend whose wife had just had a baby. A lot of people saw him. He could not have been at your office signing any contract." Malcolm's face darkened. "You are mistaken. It was a different day." "I am not mistaken. The notary seal on that paper says March 15, 1878. Samuel Zarelli was in town that entire day, nowhere near your ranch or your office. That signature is a forgery." The silence that followed was electric. Penelope stared at Isaac, hope and disbelief warring in her chest. Could it be true? Had Malcolm actually forged her father's signature? "You are lying," Malcolm said flatly. "I am not. And there are at least a dozen witnesses in town who can confirm Samuel Zarelli was there all day on March 15. The storekeeper, the bartender, the men he bought drinks for, all of them will remember because of the new baby. It was a big celebration." Malcolm's jaw worked. His carefully constructed plan was unraveling, and Penelope could see him scrambling for a response. "Even if that were true," he said slowly, "it proves nothing. The date on the contract could be wrong. Perhaps the notary made an error." "Then the contract is invalid," Isaac said. "A document with the wrong date is not legally binding." "You are not a lawyer." "No, but I know fraud when I see it, and I know that witnesses matter. I will testify that Samuel Zarelli was in town that day. I will stand before a judge and tell the truth." Malcolm stared at Isaac with undisguised hatred. This rough mountain man had just destroyed his scheme, and they both knew it. Without a valid contract, Malcolm had no claim to the ranch. And if Isaac testified, if the other witnesses confirmed the story, Malcolm would be exposed as a fraud and possibly charged with forgery. "This is not over," Malcolm said, his voice low and venomous. "You have made an enemy today, Quade." "I have faced worse than you in the mountains," Isaac replied. "Grizzlies and wolves. At least they are honest about what they are." For a moment, Penelope thought Malcolm might do something violent. His hand moved toward the pistol at his hip, and his men tensed in their saddles. But Isaac did not flinch, did not move. He simply stood there, hammer still in hand, radiating a quiet strength that was more intimidating than any threat. Malcolm finally turned his horse and rode away, his men following. They left a cloud of dust hanging in the yard. Penelope waited until they were out of sight, then turned to Isaac. Her legs felt weak and she gripped the porch railing for support. "Is it true?" she asked. "Were you really in town that day?" Isaac nodded. "Every word. I remember your father well. He was kind to me, treated me like a person when most folks looked at me like I was some kind of wild animal. We talked about the ranch, about you. He was proud of you, said you could run this place better than most men." Tears stung Penelope's eyes. That sounded like her father. "Why did you not say anything before? About meeting him?" Didn't seem relevant. But when that bastard showed up with his forged paper, I knew I had to speak up. Your father would have wanted me to protect you. You saved the ranch, maybe. Pritchard will not give up easy. Men like him never do." "What will he do?" Isaac finally looked away, his gaze traveling to the mountains in the distance. "Hard to say, but I will be here. He will not take this place while I am standing." Something in the way he said it made Penelope's heart skip. This man, this stranger, had appointed himself her protector. She should have been offended by the presumption, should have asserted her independence. Instead, she felt a rush of gratitude and something else, something she was not ready to name. "Thank you," she said quietly. Isaac nodded once, then turned and walked back to the corral. The conversation was over as far as he was concerned. Penelope watched him go, her mind reeling. Malcolm Pritchard had tried to steal her ranch through trickery, and Isaac Quade had exposed the lie. But the mountain man was right. This was not over. The confrontation with Malcolm Pritchard changed something in the air around the ranch. The other hands, Pete and Samuel and young Tommy, regarded Isaac with new respect. He had stood up to the most powerful man in the county and emerged unscathed. Word spread through Cripple Creek like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew that Malcolm Pritchard's contract had been challenged, that there was a witness who could prove it was fraudulent. The town took sides. Some supported Malcolm, unwilling to believe that such a respected rancher would stoop to forgery. Others were not surprised at all. Malcolm had a reputation for ruthlessness in business, for acquiring land through methods that were legal but morally questionable. A forgery was just the next step. Penelope received visitors. The local banker stopped by to assure her that her father's accounts were in order and that she had access to all funds. The lawyer in town, a nervous man named Henderson, offered his services if she needed to take legal action. And several neighboring ranchers, smaller operations that had felt the pressure of Malcolm's expansion, quietly let her know they stood with her. Through it all, Isaac worked. He seemed unaffected by the attention, unbothered by his sudden notoriety. He fixed what needed fixing, tended the cattle, and spoke only when necessary. But Penelope found herself increasingly aware of his presence. When she was in the house, she knew where he was in the yard. When she went to the barn, she looked for him. It was not attraction, she told herself. It was simply gratitude, the natural response to someone who had done her such a service. But that was a lie, and she knew it. There was something about Isaac Quade that called to her. It was not just his strength, though watching him work, seeing the play of muscles beneath his shirt, made her feel things she had no business feeling. It was not just his protection, though she felt safer with him near than she had since her father died. It was something deeper, something in the quiet way he moved through the world, as if he carried sorrows he would never speak of but bore them with dignity. She wanted to know him. She wanted to understand what had driven him to the mountains and what had brought him back down. One evening in early July, after the work was done and the other hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Penelope found Isaac sitting on the corral fence, watching the sunset. The sky was aflame with color, the mountains black silhouettes against the light. She approached quietly, half expecting him to leave when he saw her. But he stayed, glancing at her briefly before returning his attention to the view. "Beautiful," she said, climbing up to sit beside him on the fence. "It is. The mountains are even more beautiful, I imagine." "From where you were. Different," Isaac said. "Higher, colder, lonelier." "Do you miss it?" He was quiet for a long time, then he said, "Sometimes, but I was ready to come down." "Why?" Another long silence. Penelope waited, sensing that pushing would get her nowhere. Finally, Isaac spoke, his voice low and rough. "I had a wife once. A son. We lived in Montana near Bozeman. I was working a ranch, doing well. Then cholera came through, wiped out half the town, took my wife and boy in the same week." Penelope's hand flew to her mouth. "Isaac, I am so sorry. I could not stay there, could not be around people, around families, so I went to the mountains. Figured if I was going to be alone, I might as well be really alone." 10 years, Penelope said softly. "That is a long time to carry that grief. Not long enough to forget, but long enough to know I cannot hide forever. I am 40 years old. If I stay in the mountains much longer, I will die there. Maybe that would have been fine. But then I came down to Cripple Creek for supplies and heard about your father. Heard you needed help. Thought maybe I could be useful one more time." Penelope felt tears on her cheeks. The image of this strong, quiet man broken by loss and fleeing to the wilderness to nurse his wounds was almost too much to bear. "You are very useful," she said. "You saved this ranch. You saved me." Isaac turned to look at her then, really look at her. His eyes, those ice-blue eyes, held hers. "You are stronger than you know, Miss Zarelli. You would have found a way." "Penelope," she said. "Please call me Penelope. Penelope." The way he said her name, soft and careful, made her shiver. They sat in silence as the sun disappeared and the stars began to emerge. Penelope was intensely aware of how close they were sitting, their legs nearly touching. She could smell him, a mix of leather and pine and honest sweat. It was not unpleasant. It was, she realized with a start, intoxicating. "I should go in," she said, though she made no move to leave, probably. Neither of them moved. The night deepened around them. Somewhere a coyote howled, lonely and distant. Penelope felt as if they were the only two people in the world, perched on this fence between the ranch and the wilderness. "Isaac," she said, "I am glad you came down from the mountains." He looked at her again, and this time something shifted in his expression. The wall he kept around himself seemed to crack, just a little. "So am I," he said. Malcolm Pritchard did not come back to the ranch, but his presence was felt. Strange things began to happen. Fences that had just been repaired were cut in the night, allowing cattle to wander. A fire started mysteriously in the hay barn, though Isaac spotted it quickly and they managed to put it out before it spread. Supplies went missing. Someone shot at Tommy one afternoon while he was riding the fence line. The bullet missed, but the message was clear. Isaac met with Penelope and the other hands to discuss what to do. "He is trying to make you give up," Isaac said. "Make it so hard to keep the ranch going that you will have no choice but to sell." "We cannot prove it is him," Pete said. His gnarled hands shook as he rolled a cigarette. "We do not need to prove it. We know it is him. The question is what we do about it." "I will not sell," Penelope said fiercely. "I will not give him the satisfaction. Then we need to be smart, keep watch at night, work in pairs during the day. Tommy, you do not ride alone anymore. Understand?" The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. "I will ride to town tomorrow," Penelope said. "Talk to the sheriff, see if he will do anything." Isaac's expression was skeptical. "Sheriff and Pritchard are friends. I would not count on much help there. I have to try." The next morning, Penelope rode into Cripple Creek. The town was bustling, full of miners and merchants and families going about their business. She tied her horse outside the sheriff's office and went inside, preparing herself for an argument. Sheriff Daniels was a heavy-set man in his 50s with a mustache that drooped over his upper lip. He looked up from his desk when Penelope entered, his expression carefully neutral. "Miss Zarelli, what can I do for you?" She told him everything. The cut fences, the fire, the shot at Tommy. Sheriff Daniels listened without interrupting, his face betraying nothing. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "That is concerning. But do you have any proof these incidents are connected to Mr. Pritchard? Who else would it be? Could be anybody. Drifters, thieves, someone with a grudge. You cannot just accuse a man like Malcolm Pritchard without evidence. He tried to steal my ranch with a forged contract. What more evidence do you need of his character?" The sheriff's eyes hardened. "That contract business is still under dispute. And even if it was forged, which I am not saying it was, that does not mean he is behind every problem you are having now." Penelope felt her temper flare. "So you will do nothing?" "I will keep my ears open. If I hear anything, I will let you know, but I cannot arrest a man based on suspicion." It was a dismissal. Penelope stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "Thank you for your time, Sheriff." She left the office, her frustration barely contained. Isaac had been right. The sheriff was in Malcolm's pocket, or at least unwilling to cross him. They were on their own. She was untying her horse when she heard her name. Turning, she saw a woman approaching, middle-aged and kindly-faced, wearing a simple calico dress. "Miss Zarelli, I am Martha Brennan, Tommy's mother." "Oh, yes, of course, Tommy is a good worker," Martha smiled. "He speaks highly of you. And of that mountain man you hired, Isaac Quade. Isaac is a good man." "I wanted to tell you something," Martha said, glancing around as if to make sure they were not overheard. "My husband works in town at the livery. He sees things, hears things. He heard Malcolm Pritchard talking to some rough men a few days ago, hiring them for something. It did not sound good." Penelope's stomach tightened. "What did they say?" He could not hear all of it, but he heard Pritchard mention your ranch. "And he heard him tell the men to make sure no one got hurt, but that you needed to be scared enough to leave." "Will your husband testify to that?" Martha's face fell. "He is afraid. Malcolm Pritchard is a powerful man. If my husband speaks against him, we could lose everything. I am sorry." Penelope understood. She did not like it, but she understood. "Thank you for telling me. Be careful, Miss Zarelli. Watch yourself and that mountain man. I think Pritchard is getting desperate." Penelope rode back to the ranch with Martha's warning ringing in her ears. When she arrived, she found Isaac in the barn repairing a saddle. She told him what she had learned. Isaac's jaw tightened. "Then we need to be ready." "For what?" "For whatever he is planning." That night, Isaac took the first watch. Penelope tried to sleep but could not. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds. Around midnight, she gave up and got dressed. She made coffee and took a cup out to Isaac, who was sitting on the porch with a rifle across his knees. "Could not sleep?" he asked when she handed him the coffee. "No." "You should rest. I can watch for a while. I am fine." Penelope sat down beside him. The night was warm, full of cricket song and the distant lowing of cattle. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to see by. "Isaac," she said, "if this gets dangerous, you should leave. This is not your fight." He looked at her, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "Where would I go? Back to the mountains. Anywhere. You do not owe me anything." "I think I do." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because you gave me a reason to come back down. Because for the first time in 10 years, I feel like I belong somewhere. Because when I look at you, I do not just see the past. I see something that might be a future." Penelope's breath caught. "Isaac." "I am not good with words," he said roughly. "I do not know how to say things pretty. But I am not leaving, Penelope. Not unless you tell me to go." She reached out and took his hand. It was rough and calloused, twice the size of hers, and holding it felt like the most natural thing in the world. "I am not telling you to go," she whispered. They sat like that for a long time, hands clasped, watching the night. Something had shifted between them, something irrevocable. Penelope knew she was falling in love with this quiet mountain man, and the knowledge was both terrifying and exhilarating. The attack came 2 nights later. Penelope woke to the sound of shouting and gunfire. She grabbed her father's rifle and ran outside in her nightgown, her heart pounding. The barn was on fire, flames leaping high into the night sky. Dark figures on horseback circled the yard, firing pistols into the air and whooping like bandits. Isaac was already there, returning fire from behind the water trough. Pete and Samuel stumbled out of the bunkhouse, rifles in hand. Tommy was with them, his face white but determined. "Get back inside," Isaac shouted at Penelope. "The horses are in the barn," she screamed back. Without thinking, she ran toward the barn. The heat was intense, the smoke choking. She could hear the horses screaming in terror. She got the door open and plunged inside, the world immediately obscured by thick smoke. She found the first horse, a young mare, and led her out. The mare bolted as soon as they were clear. Penelope went back in for the next one. The smoke was worse now, burning her lungs. She could barely see. She found another horse and was leading it out when a burning beam fell from above, missing her by inches. Strong hands grabbed her, pulling her back. Isaac. He took the horse's lead and shoved Penelope toward the door. "Get out," he roared. She stumbled outside, coughing and gasping. Isaac emerged a moment later with the horse, then went back in again. He came out twice more, each time with a horse, until all 6 animals were out of the burning structure. The riders had scattered when the ranch hands started shooting back. The barn was a total loss, but the fire had not spread to the other buildings. Isaac, Pete, and Samuel worked frantically to wet down the nearby structures while the barn collapsed in on itself, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. By the time the sun rose, the barn was a blackened skeleton, and everyone was exhausted. Penelope's face and hands were covered in soot, and her nightgown was singed and ruined. But they were alive, and the horses were safe, and the rest of the ranch was intact. Sheriff Daniels rode out around mid-morning. He surveyed the damage, asked a few cursory questions, and pronounced it likely the work of drifters. "Drifters," Isaac said flatly. 6 men on horseback, all armed, who just happened to pick this ranch to burn down. "You have any proof it was someone specific?" the sheriff asked. "Malcolm Pritchard," Penelope said. "He is trying to force me off my land." "That is a serious accusation, Miss Zarelli. Unless you have evidence, we have a witness," Isaac interrupted. "Martha Brennan's husband heard Pritchard hiring men to scare Miss Zarelli." The sheriff's expression hardened. "If you are referring to John Brennan, I already spoke to him. He says he heard no such thing." Penelope's heart sank. John Brennan had been intimidated into silence. "This is not over," Isaac said quietly. "You know it and I know it. Pritchard will keep coming until he gets what he wants or someone stops him. If you are threatening, I am stating facts. And the fact is, you are not doing your job, Sheriff, so we will protect ourselves." The sheriff left, his face red with anger. Penelope watched him go, feeling despair settle over her. They were alone in this fight with no help from the law. "We cannot keep going like this," Pete said. He looked ancient, his face gray with exhaustion. "I am sorry, Miss Zarelli, but I am too old for this. I need to move on." Samuel nodded reluctantly. "I feel the same. I am sorry." Penelope wanted to argue, wanted to beg them to stay, but she could not. They had worked for her father for decades, had given their best years to this ranch. They deserved to retire in peace, not to die defending it from a tyrant. "I understand," she said quietly. Thank you for everything." They left the next day, both men looking relieved despite their obvious guilt. Tommy stayed loyal and brave despite his youth. But now there were only three of them: Penelope, Isaac, and Tommy. Three people to run a 300-acre ranch and defend it against Malcolm Pritchard. That night, Isaac sat Penelope down in the kitchen. His face was grave. "We need to end this," he said. "One way or another. How, I have an idea, but it is risky. Tell me, the forged contract." "Pritchard still has it, and he probably thinks he can still use it somehow. If we can get our hands on it, we can prove it is a forgery. I know a federal marshal in Denver, a man I served with in the Army years ago. He could examine the document, compare it to genuine examples of your father's handwriting. If he declares it a forgery, Pritchard will be finished. He could go to prison." "How do we get the contract?" "We break into his office and take it." Penelope stared at him. "That is illegal." "So is forgery. So is arson. Pritchard does not play by the rules, neither can we. If we are caught, we will not be caught. I have broken into trappers' cabins, prospectors' camps, places you would not believe. I know how to move quiet. I know how to get in and out without being seen." Penelope's mind raced. It was insane. It was dangerous. But what choice did they have? Malcolm Pritchard was systematically destroying her ranch, and no one would stop him. The law would not help. Her neighbors were too afraid to stand against him. It was just her and Isaac, and if they did not act, she would lose everything. "All right," she said. "When?" "Tomorrow night. There is a dance at the town hall. Pritchard will be there. Half the county will be there. His office will be empty." "What about his men, his foreman, Sykes?" "I will handle it." The next day dragged by. Penelope tried to work, tried to keep busy, but her mind was on the coming night. Isaac was calm, methodical, checking supplies and preparing. Tommy sensed something was happening but asked no questions. As evening approached, Isaac changed into dark clothes. He strapped a knife to his belt and tucked a small pistol into his boot. Penelope changed as well, putting on the darkest dress she owned. "You are not coming," Isaac said when he saw her. "Yes, I am. It is too dangerous." "It is my ranch, Isaac, my fight. I am coming." They stared at each other, wills clashing. Finally, Isaac nodded. "Stay close to me. Do exactly what I say." They left Tommy to watch the ranch, though Penelope doubted Malcolm would try anything tonight when he had an alibi at the dance. They rode to Cripple Creek under a sliver of moon, the night dark and still. Music and laughter drifted from the town hall as they approached, the sound of fiddles and stamping feet. Malcolm Pritchard's office was on the main street, above the land office. Isaac and Penelope left their horses at the edge of town and approached on foot, staying in the shadows. The street was mostly empty, everyone at the dance. Isaac jimmied the lock on the back door with practiced ease. They slipped inside, moving quietly up the stairs to Pritchard's office. Another lock, another moment of tense silence while Isaac worked. Then they were inside. The office was spacious and well-appointed, full of heavy furniture and leather-bound ledgers. Isaac lit a small candle, shielding the flame with his hand, and they began to search. Penelope went through the desk while Isaac checked the file cabinets. "Here," Penelope whispered, her heart leaping. She held up a folder. Inside was the contract, along with other documents, notes in Malcolm's handwriting detailing his plan. Correspondence with the notary, a man named Wickham, discussing how much he would be paid to falsify the date. It was all there. Complete proof of the fraud. "Let us go," Isaac said, taking the folder. They were halfway down the stairs when they heard voices. Male voices, coming from the back door. Penelope's heart stopped. Isaac grabbed her arm and pulled her back up the stairs into Pritchard's office. They ducked behind the desk just as footsteps sounded in the hallway. "I am telling you, I saw someone go in," a voice said. It sounded like Sykes, Pritchard's foreman. "You have been drinking," another voice replied. "Not that much. Someone is in the boss's office. I am going to check." The doorknob turned. Penelope held her breath, pressed against Isaac in the cramped space behind the desk. The candle had been snuffed, but had they left any other signs of their presence? Light spilled into the room as Sykes entered, holding a lantern. He walked slowly, looking around. Penelope could see his boots through the gap under the desk. He was coming closer. Isaac's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Penelope put her hand over his, squeezing, begging him silently not to do anything. If they hurt Sykes, they would be criminals, no better than Pritchard. Sykes stood in the middle of the room, so close Penelope could hear him breathing. Then, blessedly, he turned and walked back toward the door. "Nothing here," he called. "You are seeing ghosts." "Told you," the other voice said. The door closed. The footsteps receded. Penelope and Isaac stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity, making sure the men were truly gone. Finally, Isaac rose and pulled Penelope to her feet. They made their way out of the building and back to their horses without further incident. By the time they reached the ranch, Penelope was shaking with adrenaline and relief. They had done it. They had the evidence. The next morning, Isaac rode to Denver to find his contact, the federal marshal. He was gone for 3 days. Penelope spent that time in an agony of waiting, jumping at every sound, convinced that Malcolm Pritchard would discover the theft and come for revenge. But Isaac returned safely, and he brought good news. The marshal had examined the documents and declared them clear evidence of fraud. He was preparing an arrest warrant for Malcolm Pritchard and the notary, Wickham. Federal charges, not local ones. The sheriff would have no say in the matter. 1 week later, Marshal Hendricks arrived in Cripple Creek with 2 deputies. They arrested Malcolm Pritchard in front of half the town, dragging him out of his ranch house in handcuffs. Wickham, the crooked notary, was arrested the same day. The documents Isaac had taken were entered into evidence, and Pritchard's plot was exposed for everyone to see. The trial was held in Denver 2 months later. Isaac testified about seeing Samuel Zarelli in town on the day the contract was supposedly signed. A dozen other witnesses confirmed his testimony. The bartender, the storekeeper, the men who had celebrated the birth of their friend's child all remembered Samuel Zarelli being in town that day. The evidence was overwhelming. Malcolm Pritchard was convicted of fraud and forgery. He was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. His ranch was sold to pay his legal debts, the land parceled out to smaller ranchers. His empire, built on intimidation and ruthless acquisition, crumbled to dust. Penelope attended the trial, sitting in the courtroom and watching as justice was finally served. When the verdict was read, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying since her father's death. It was over. The ranch was safe. Isaac had testified with quiet dignity, his story clear and unshakable. Watching him on the stand, Penelope felt her heart swell with love and pride. This man, this silent mountain man who had come into her life like an answer to a prayer, had saved her, not just her ranch, but her. When they returned to Cripple Creek, the town treated them like heroes. People who had been too afraid to speak out against Pritchard now came forward with their own stories of his cruelty and greed. Penelope realized how many people had been living under his shadow, too frightened to resist. The ranch recovered slowly. They rebuilt the barn with help from neighboring ranchers who were grateful to see Pritchard brought down. Penelope hired new hands, good men who were loyal and hardworking. The cattle thrived. The land bloomed under her care, and through it all, Isaac was there. He had taken on the role of foreman without being asked, managing the day-to-day operations of the ranch with quiet competence. But more than that, He had become her partner in every sense. They worked side by side, ate their meals together, sat on the porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. Their relationship deepened slowly, like roots growing down into soil. Isaac was not a man who rushed anything, and Penelope respected that. But there were moments, small touches and long looks that spoke of something powerful building between them. When he smiled at her, rare and precious, her heart sang. When he stood close, she felt safe in a way she never had before. It was autumn when Isaac finally spoke the words that had been hanging between them for months. They were riding the fence line together, checking for damage after a storm. The aspens were golden, the air crisp and clean. They stopped to let the horses drink from a creek, and Isaac turned to her. "Penelope," he said, "I have something to say." Her heart began to pound. "All right. I came down from the mountains because I was tired of being alone, but I did not expect to find you. I did not expect to feel this way." "What way?" He dismounted and walked to her horse, reaching up to help her down. She slid into his arms, and for a moment they just stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath. "I love you," Isaac said, the words rough and uncertain. "I know I am not the kind of man you probably imagined. I am older, I have lived a hard life, I am not educated or polished, but I love you with everything I am, and if you will have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Tears streamed down Penelope's face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaac, I love you too. I have loved you since the day you stood up to Malcolm Pritchard and defended me. Maybe even before that." He cupped her face in his large, rough hands and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and hungry, full of months of longing and restraint finally breaking free. Penelope kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Be my wife." "Yes," Penelope said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in November in the small church in Cripple Creek. Half the town attended, even people Penelope barely knew. It seemed everyone wanted to celebrate the union of the rancher's daughter and the mountain man who had saved her. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit. Isaac wore a new suit that he looked profoundly uncomfortable in, though Penelope thought he had never looked more handsome. His hair was trimmed, his beard neat, and when he looked at her as she walked down the aisle, his eyes held such love and devotion that she could barely breathe. They spoke their vows in voices that shook with emotion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac kissed her as if sealing a sacred pact, and the congregation erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, tables set up in the yard under the clear blue sky. There was food and music and dancing. Isaac, who claimed he did not know how to dance, surprised everyone by sweeping Penelope into a waltz, holding her close and moving with a natural grace that took her breath away. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, laughing. "My wife taught me," he said quietly. "A long time ago." Penelope understood. He was not trying to forget his first love, and she did not want him to. That part of his life, that loss, had made him who he was. It had brought him to the mountains and eventually back down to her. She could honor it without feeling threatened by it. "She would be happy you found love again," Penelope said. Isaac's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I think she would. I think she would have liked you." That night, they made love for the first time in the big bed that had been Penelope's parents'. Isaac was gentle despite his size and strength, attentive to her needs and her pleasure. Penelope gave herself to him completely, without reservation or fear. They learned each other's bodies slowly, reverently, and when they finally joined, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Penelope's head on Isaac's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I would be this happy again," Isaac said into the darkness. "Neither did I," Penelope replied. "But here we are. Here we are." The first years of their marriage were marked by hard work and deep contentment. The ranch thrived under their joint management. Isaac proved to be a brilliant foreman, understanding cattle and horses with an instinct honed by years of observing animals in the wild. Penelope handled the business side, negotiating sales and managing finances with a sharp mind for numbers. They made a formidable team, and their reputation grew. Other ranchers sought Isaac's advice on everything from breeding stock to predator control. Penelope became known as a shrewd businesswoman, one of the few female ranchers in Colorado who ran her own operation without a male guardian. Their love deepened with each passing season. They learned to communicate in the shorthand of longtime partners, understanding each other with a look or a gesture. Isaac remained a man of few words, but Penelope learned to read him like a book. She knew when he was troubled by the set of his shoulders, knew when he was happy by the way he looked at her, that soft smile that was hers alone. In the spring of 1880, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same spot where they had first really talked 2 years before. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Isaac's eyes widened. "You are, yes, we are going to have a baby." For a moment she saw fear flash across his face and she understood. He had lost a child once. The idea of loving another, of risking that pain again, must be terrifying. But then his expression shifted and what replaced the fear was wonder. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" "I am terrified," Isaac admitted. "But yes, I am happy. So happy I do not have words for it." He pulled her into his arms and held her as if she were made of glass, his face buried in her hair. Penelope felt him trembling and knew he was crying, silent tears of joy and fear and overwhelming love. The pregnancy was not easy. Penelope suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first months, and as she grew larger, the work of the ranch became more difficult. Isaac was constantly hovering, worried that she was doing too much, lifting too much, riding too far. She found it both endearing and infuriating. "I am not fragile," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a saddle. "I know, but I cannot lose you. I cannot lose this baby. Please, Penelope, let me help." She saw the raw fear in his eyes and softened. "All right. But you have to let me do some things. I will go mad if I just sit around." They compromised. Penelope did lighter work, managed the books, supervised rather than labored. Isaac took on even more of the physical burden, working from dawn to dusk to keep the ranch running smoothly. Tommy, now 18 and a capable hand, stepped up as well. They hired 2 more men to help with the workload. The baby came in January 1881, during a blizzard that shut down half the county. The midwife could not make it through the snow, so it was just Isaac and Penelope, alone in their bedroom as she labored to bring their child into the world. Isaac had delivered foals and calves, had even helped birth a human child once during his trapping years when a pregnant woman stumbled into his camp. But this was different. This was Penelope, his wife, his heart. He was terrified, but Penelope was strong. She labored for hours, gripping Isaac's hand so hard she left bruises, and finally, as the storm raged outside, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and perfect, and Isaac caught him with shaking hands. "A boy," he said, his voice breaking. "Penelope, we have a son." She was exhausted, soaked with sweat, but she held out her arms. Isaac placed the baby on her chest, and they both stared at him in awe. He was tiny, barely 6 pounds, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same gray-blue as his father's. "What should we name him?" Penelope asked. Isaac was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "If it is all right with you, I would like to name him after my first son. His name was Matthew." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "Matthew Quade, it is perfect." "Matthew Samuel Quade," Isaac added, "after your father too." "Matthew Samuel Quade," Penelope repeated, testing the name. "Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world." The baby yawned, a huge yawn for such a tiny thing, and then settled into sleep. Isaac and Penelope looked at each other over their son's head, and no words were needed. They had created life together, had brought this perfect being into existence. It was a miracle. Matthew was a healthy, happy baby. He had his father's even temperament and his mother's curiosity. As he grew, he became the light of their lives. Isaac, who had been so afraid of loving another child, proved to be a devoted father. He carried Matthew everywhere, showed him the ranch, taught him the names of animals and plants before the boy could even talk. Penelope watched her husband with their son and felt her heart overflow. This strong, silent man who had been so broken by loss had found the courage to love again. And their love had created this beautiful child. 2 years later, they had a daughter. She was born in the spring, an easier birth than Matthew's, and they named her Clara Rose. She had Penelope's dark eyes and Isaac's quiet nature, and she was utterly adored by her older brother. The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their herd, built a new barn even larger than the one that had burned, and purchased an additional 100 acres from a neighboring rancher who retired. The Quade Ranch, as it was now known, became one of the most respected operations in the county. But more than the success, more than the land or the cattle, what mattered to Penelope and Isaac was the family they had built. Every evening they gathered around the dinner table, the 4 of them, and shared the day's events. Matthew would chatter about the calf he had helped birth, or the hawk he had seen circling. Clara would show them the flowers she had picked, and Penelope and Isaac would exchange looks across the table, silent communication that spoke of love and gratitude. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Penelope with a gift. It was a carved wooden box, intricately detailed, clearly the work of many hours. "I made this in the mountains," he said as she opened it, "before I came down. I had no idea who it was for at the time, but I think somehow I knew I was making it for you." Inside the box were small treasures from Isaac's years in the high country, a perfect arrowhead he had found, a piece of quartz shot through with gold, a hawk feather. And at the bottom, a piece of paper with writing on it. Penelope unfolded it carefully. It was a list, written in Isaac's rough hand. "Reasons to come down from the mountain. I am tired of being alone. 10 years is long enough to grieve. I want to feel useful again. Maybe there is someone out there who needs me. Maybe I can love again if I am brave enough to try." Penelope looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. "You wrote this before you met me." "The day before I rode into Cripple Creek. I had been thinking about it for months, but I needed to write it down to make it real, and then I met you and I knew. You were the reason I came down. You were always the reason." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, pouring all her love into it. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being brave enough to try, for loving me, for giving me this life." "Thank you," Isaac replied, "for letting me." The years passed in a blur of seasons. Matthew grew tall and strong, so much like his father it was startling. By the time he was 15, he stood 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, and his father's quiet competence. Clara grew into a bright, curious girl who loved books and horses in equal measure. They were both taught to read and write by Penelope, who valued education even if the nearest school was miles away. In 1890, when Matthew was 9 and Clara was 7, Penelope gave birth to twin boys. The pregnancy had been a shock, the birth exhausting, but the babies were healthy. They named them Jacob and James, and they were hellions from the start, full of energy and mischief. Isaac, now 50 years old, adapted to the chaos of 4 children with surprising grace. He built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, adding rooms and a wide porch where they could all sit on summer evenings. The ranch employed 8 full-time hands now, and Tommy, who had married and started his own family, served as assistant foreman. Penelope sometimes thought about how her life might have been different if Malcolm Pritchard had succeeded in his scheme. She would have lost the ranch, probably would have been forced to marry someone she did not love or move away to start over elsewhere. She never would have known this life, this love, this family, but Isaac had stood as her witness. He had exposed the lie and defended her when no one else would. He had saved her, and in doing so had saved himself. One evening in the summer of 1895, Penelope and Isaac sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard. Matthew, now 14, was teaching the twins to rope a fence post. Clara, 12, was reading a book under a tree, her horse grazing nearby. "You ever miss the mountains?" Penelope asked. It was a question she had asked before over the years, and the answer had changed with time. Isaac considered it, as he always did. "Sometimes I miss the quiet, but not the loneliness. Never that." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I found my peace here, with you." "With them?" He nodded toward their children. Matthew had just succeeded in roping the post, and the twins were cheering. Even Clara had looked up from her book to clap. "We built a good life," Penelope said. "We did. And it all started because I happened to be in town the right day, heard about a woman who needed help, and decided to take a chance." "More than that," Penelope said firmly. "It started because you were brave enough to tell the truth when it mattered. You stood up to a powerful man and exposed his lie. You saved me." "We saved each other," Isaac replied. "I was as lost as you were, just in a different way." It was true, Penelope reflected. They had both been alone, both struggling, both in need of someone to stand beside them. They had found each other at exactly the right moment, and they had built something beautiful from the ashes of their individual losses. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, their children came running up to the porch. Matthew had a question about the herd. Clara wanted to show her mother a passage in her book. The twins were hungry and demanded dinner. Penelope stood, smoothing her skirt, ready to go inside and start the evening meal. But first she leaned down and kissed Isaac, soft and lingering. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he replied, as he always did. The words never got old. They went inside together, their children trailing behind, filling the house with noise and life and laughter. The ranch stretched out around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to hard work and determination. The mountains rose in the distance, beautiful and remote, the place Isaac had once hidden from the world. But he was not hiding anymore. He was home. They both were. And in the years that followed, as their children grew and had children of their own, as the Quad Ranch became a legacy passed down through generations, the story of how it all began was never forgotten. It became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. The story of how a rancher tried to claim Penelope through trickery, and how a mountain man exposed the lie and stood as her witness true. How that act of courage had sparked a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. How 2 lonely people had found each other in the hard, beautiful wilderness of Colorado and built a life that honored both their pasts and their future. In 1910, On their 30th wedding anniversary, Penelope and Isaac sat on their porch once more. They were older now, gray-haired and weathered, but still strong. Matthew ran the ranch with his father, and Clara had married a banker in Denver but visited often with her 3 children. The twins, now 20 and wild as ever, worked the ranch and kept everyone on their toes. 30 years, Penelope said wonderingly. It does not seem possible. Best 30 years of my life, Isaac replied. His voice was rougher now, aged by time, but his eyes were the same clear gray-blue she had fallen in love with. You have any regrets? Only one, Isaac said. I wish I had come down from the mountains sooner, so I could have had even more time with you. Penelope laughed, the sound bright and full of joy. We have had plenty of time, and we have years yet. She was right. They lived well into their 70s. Isaac finally passing in the winter of 1918, just after his 78th birthday. Penelope held his hand as he slipped away. Their children and grandchildren gathered around. His last words were her name, spoken with love. Penelope followed 2 years later, in the spring of 1920. She was buried beside Isaac on a hillside overlooking the ranch, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their lives. But the true monument to their love was the ranch itself, still thriving, still in the family, a testament to the courage of a woman who refused to surrender, and the mountain man who stood beside her. And so the story ended, not with tragedy or sorrow, but with a love that endured beyond death, a legacy that lived on in the land and the people who worked it. The rancher had tried to claim her through trickery, but the mountain man had exposed the lie and stood as her witness true. And from that moment of truth had grown a love story for the ages, rooted in the wild beauty of the Colorado territory and the unshakable bond between 2 souls who had found their home in each other. The sun set over the Quad Ranch as it had 10,000 times before, painting the mountains gold and purple, and if you listened carefully, you might have heard the echo of laughter, the sound of children playing, the quiet murmur of 2 voices talking on a porch as evening fell. Ghosts, perhaps, or simply memories so strong they left an imprint on the land itself. Either way, the ranch endured and the story was told, generation after generation, a reminder that truth and courage and love could overcome any obstacle, no matter how powerful the adversary or how desperate the odds. That sometimes the greatest victories came not from violence or wealth or power, but from one person standing up and saying, "This is wrong, and I will bear witness to the truth." Isaac Quade had done that for Penelope Zarelli, and in doing so, he had changed both their lives forever. And that, in the end, was what mattered. Not the land or the cattle or the money, but the love they had built and the family they had raised and the truth they had defended together. It was a story worthy of the Wild West, full of danger and courage and romance. But more than that, it was a story of 2 people who had lost everything and found each other, who had faced down evil and emerged victorious, who had loved fiercely and completely until their last breaths. And so, as the stars came out over the Colorado mountains and the night settled soft and deep over the Quad Ranch, the story came to its end, not with questions or uncertainty, but with the peace of knowing that Penelope and Isaac had lived well, loved deeply, and left behind something beautiful. Their children carried on their work, their grandchildren learned their lessons, and their great-grandchildren heard their story and understood that sometimes, against all odds, love really does conquer all. The end had come as it comes for everyone, but it was a good end, a closed end. Everything resolved, every thread tied off, every question answered. Penelope and Isaac had found their happily ever after in the wild mountains of Colorado, and their legacy lived on long after they were gone, a testament to the power of truth, the strength of love, and the courage of two people who refused to surrender to injustice. And if that was not a perfect ending, then nothing was.